I am Willow Hewitt. I lived in Hong Kong for about 8 years. I was working for iLearner there, doing all sorts of things, teaching in the English department, doing literature and language, as well as creating some books that we have at iLearner publishing to help students who are learning English. And now I'm back in the UK. I came back in 2020 and I'm running a team over here in the UK. It's bringing the same iLearner nurturing, fully all-rounded learning approach to the UK, and particularly trying to help students who have come over from Hong Kong make sure they are making the best of their successful lives here in UK schools. So one barrier to that sometimes is the fact that English people are not great at saying what they mean. So my session is the fun one where I try and explain why it is that English people do not just say what they mean directly. When I first came to Hong Kong, I found it quite surprising how direct Hong Kong people are. And I love it now, but it definitely took some getting used to, especially when people are talking about their children. They would be very open. They might say, oh, she's weak at that. She's lazy. In a way that you would never in the UK. It feels quite shocking. So we just have a different culture of how we might express things that we say about each other, to each other, and about students. So we'll go through some examples of that, and I'm just going to share a presentation with you all about why English people do not say what they mean. So I'm just going to bring that up on my screen and share that with you now. So my main focus is on communication styles and how you can make conversations, particularly conversations with teachers, work for you. So we'll look at some specific phrases. I just want to reassure you and say that it is also English people are annoyed about how indirect English people are. There's very popular social media accounts on many different platforms called Very British Problems. And it's often people complaining about the weather or about cups of tea. But it's also often people complaining about how indirect people are speaking. So this is a great example about if you get an email and somebody wants to express that they are angry at you, they might say, as discussed, I thought we agreed, regards, thanks. They all sound like very ordinary phrases, but to an English person, you know, somebody is very, very angry at you and you need to make things right. You need to apologize somewhere. So there's lots of examples like this, and it's a fun way to lighten the mood when we realize nobody in England is very good at communicating with each other directly. And I would say that is particularly true in schools. In some way, in a way that is culturally important to us. It's very important to have politeness as a priority, and to be very encouraging. So when we have children in schools, even if they are at the bottom of the class, the teachers will always be as kind as possible to them, really focusing on what they have done well. And they will express negative things in a way that is to encourage self-reflection. So they might ask questions rather than point out a problem. They might say something like, oh, can you just recheck that question and have a think about what you really meant? And what the teacher is trying to say there is, you are wrong. But they want the student to figure out how they are wrong. And you'll see a lot of that in all areas of teaching. And even when parents and teachers are communicating to each other, you'll see that teachers are focusing more on the positive and on the learning experience and like understanding self-reflection rather than saying positive and negative direct things. They'll also often make suggestions to you. So they might say something like, oh, you could consider reading more books. And really, it's a polite way of saying, you absolutely have to read more books. You cannot read. But we can't say that directly to somebody's face in England. You'd have to say, oh, maybe, perhaps, possibly you want to read some more books. That's the polite way you say it. And they'll always be emphasizing the positive. So they might say, oh, your writing was much neater than it was last term. It could still be very messy. I personally have incredibly messy handwriting, and I have had a lot of positive comments from teachers about neater than it used to be, which is as good as I can hope for, because my handwriting is just terrible. And to lead on from that as well, it's very personalized to each student. So my handwriting is never going to be neat. It is just impossible, no matter how hard I tried. And that is fine. There's no point in me feeling bad about it forever. Teachers were very, able to work at my level and always focus on improvements, which means that I did not lose my love of writing. And in fact, I write fiction every day because I love writing so much, even though my writing is messy. So one thing that I think is helpful to think about is just some key things that teachers are doing and how you can respond to that if you want to keep your communication very productive. as I said, teachers will be polite as a priority. They will do things like talk about the weather when you sit down talking to them. They will talk about the current holiday, oh, it's been snowy a lot. Of course, it's been snowy. It's the middle of winter. Just make sure you're engaging with that. It's a great way just to make a connection, and with all English people as well. But do feel free to make it very clear that you're not going to be as dancing around things politely as they might be. So you can say something directly like, English isn't my first language, so I'd appreciate you being as clear and direct as possible. Just to try and get rid of things like slightly metaphorical language, more suggestions than direct instructions. It can really help just to ask for that directly. Teachers are really careful not to offend in a way that seems very natural to us, but definitely having lived in Hong Kong, I think is very British and is something that can sometimes lead to communication issues. So a teacher would not, unless you seem very eager to hear it, unless you seem very like you want to hear something negative, a teacher would not directly say anything negative. But I think it can be really helpful to a parent to hear something directly that is a problem, especially when we've got a child that's moved to a new country. There will be things that they're catching up on. They might be very far behind in science just because science is at a different level in Hong Kong than English, just like maths is different in the other way. Maths is much stronger in Hong Kong. So it might be that your child is really needing some catch-up help in science. The teacher won't want to say that as directly as they would in Hong Kong. Just be really open and make it very clear you're happy to receive any information, even if it sounds a bit negative. You can agree with them. So if the teacher says something like, they're still a little bit behind in science, you can say, oh, absolutely, I know. Hong Kong is a little bit behind in science. We're working very hard, and I would love some ideas of the topics they can improve in. And the teacher will feel very encouraged by that. Some parents can be a little bit negative in response to criticism. So a teacher will want to check that you're going to be positive when you get that sort of information. As I said, teachers are also going to emphasize any positives that they can. It is a way of being polite in English to say something positive, even if you're going to say something negative next. So you might say, oh, she's really trying her best. I have definitely had conversations in Hong Kong where I would say, oh, Hayley tried her best today. And the parent might say, no, she's quite lazy today, generally. And it feels a little bit difficult to have that conversation because the natural thing in an English conversation to do is to agree with each other and to say, oh, it's interesting that you found her hard work in your class. She was a bit lazy earlier, so it's great that she's been enthusiastic. That agreement of positivity is quite important to a polite conversation in English, so do just try and engage with that. But as I said, you can always make sure you're emphasizing the fact that you would like to be direct and clear, even if it's not natural to an English person. As I mentioned, teachers will make suggestions very subtly, like, oh, she might want to be a little bit more talkative in class. It's unclear if she's absolutely silent in class or if she just has got a quiet voice. Ask a question and just say, is she not talking enough or is her voice too quiet? You can ask that direct question because it's a matter of tone in someone's voice in English, quite what they mean, and it's hard to interpret sometimes. And then the last thing is, I think in Hong Kong schools, teachers have got a great deal of respect. Students and parents really respect teachers as someone who knows the child, knows what their work is like. And it's not as common in the UK to have that sense. Parents are often more of an authority and will expect to have a more of a conversation where they're both expressing knowledge about a child in a way that is slightly different to Hong Kong. So you can encourage the teacher to give you as much information as you can and show that you feel happy to receive anything. And that will really make a great conversation. So we're going to look at a few specific phrases. As I said, English people do not say directly what they mean. So here's some phrases that you might hear in a parent-teacher meeting, in a report, in letters from the school. These phrases are great examples of ones that are generally very positive. If I describe someone as reliable, yeah, you can always trust them. They are attentive, they pay attention, they're very independent, they can work by themselves. They all sound very positive. There is no secret other meaning there. But be careful. If a teacher says to something, they might say, oh, Hayley is too independent. And we might think, I don't know what too independent can be. It's great that she's independent. She can work by herself. But what the teacher really means is she should be asking me for more help. So if you hear a phrase like to something and it sounds like a compliment, but the to there suggests it's a problem, see if you can just rephrase it yourself or ask a direct question. So if the teacher said, Haley is too independent, you can say, oh, do you have an example where she's too independent so I can understand? Or if you can guess what it means, you want to make a guess, oh, should she be asking you for help? Just make sure you're clarifying those. We have lots of little words like this, like to something or a bit much, that suggest a problem without really saying it. And then we've got direct words where we do that, where we are hinting at a problem. And I would say it is worth you really just maybe having a look carefully at written English that you're getting back from the school, just to see if you can look for any words like these. So if I said a student were capable, capable means you can do everything, you are able to do things, but it is definitely a word that we use meaning lower than good. You can do it, but you are not good at it. It's quite a hinting word that you may want to be aware of. If I said a student was energetic, I mean too energetic. They are jumping around the classroom. They cannot be quiet when they should be. They are maybe not classroom appropriate. And then the opposite, if I said someone was quite quiet, I mean they're too quiet. I mean they are not talking in class when they should be. The same for reserved and shy. And there's, people have different temperaments. People have different levels of loud and quiet in a class. But there's a lot of participation expected in a classroom and a lot of interpersonal awareness that we're training in classrooms that I think students coming from a different culture will obviously find hard to understand. And it takes some getting used to. So just be listening for those. There's a few more here as well. I'll be sending this after to anyone signed up for the presentation. You'll be able to see this on the screen as well. So you can read these ones later. Then there are some phrases that it is worth paying attention to, as they are usually good phrases to hint at something that you need to pay attention to. For example, if I said a student has got a bit of catching up to do, I mean that they have got things they don't know, that they need to learn more. If I said a student could answer when prompted, they can answer, but they do not. They will stay very, very quiet in my class and they will not talk in a way that they should talk. So little phrases like this, if you cannot understand it, things like the AI tools that Joyce mentioned earlier, you can get those to rewrite things for you. So you might say things like, rewrite this for a second language speaker. It will simplify and make things much clearer. Or you can ask somebody that you trust who's got very strong English to explain to you anything that is not quite clear. So much English is done in hints and subtle phrases that it is definitely worth asking for help. So I've looked at a couple of example reports. I've seen a parent recently who had a school report that they weren't quite sure how to interpret. And I've written a couple of ones that are similar to that. So one's more positive than the other. This one is slightly more positive, and I've pulled out some phrases that are helpful to think about. So this one is about Jaden. Jaden has had an excellent first year in history, and he is catching up on his knowledge gaps. I'm sure with hard work, he will be up to the standard of his peers by his GCSEs. He would benefit from preparing more for his lessons in order to reach his full potential. So Jaden has had an excellent first year in history. Really common to put something positive at the beginning. But if a student were awful, a teacher wouldn't go to that effort as nicely as this. So this shows the teacher likes Jaden. He's left a good impression. Catching up on his knowledge gaps. That says he does still have gaps in his knowledge. He still has things that he doesn't know, which we would expect in history. If we're doing European history for the first time, we would expect to have gaps. You as the parent can ask for more details. This is not a very helpful report phrase for someone who also maybe hasn't studied European history. You can ask for the topics that he's missed. You can consider getting a tutor or reviewing previous textbooks from earlier years and just see what help is needed. This also says he's going to be up to the standard of his peers by GCSE. In England, it's very common to be streamed or setted for all your subjects at secondary level. So Jada might be in the bottom set for history, and that entire year might be predicted a 5 at GCSE, that entire set. So if he's up to the standard of his peers, maybe he's going to reach a 5 for GCSE, which might not be what you're expecting. You might be thinking, oh, it sounds like he's doing well. He's going to get an 8. Make sure you are checking with the school, with the teacher. What does this mean, the standard of his peers? Can you give me a number for that? And then this at the end is not helpful at all. He would benefit from preparing more for his lessons in order to reach his full potential. This sounds very negative to me, even though it's quite politely phrased. This is equivalent to saying Jaden is quite lazy. He isn't doing the work for his classes, but the teacher hasn't said what he should be doing. So go back to the teacher, ask them, is Jaden not doing his homework? Is he not bringing his books? Is he not doing the assigned reading? What can I make sure that Jaden does to keep him? And then we've got one other report for a student called Haley. And Haley is definitely not the favourite student in her class. Haley has a lot to contribute and is always eager to share her ideas with the class. She generally approaches her work with enthusiasm, but sometimes fails to apply this to her homework. She is getting better at spelling and writing, but her presentation could be neater. There are several areas in this that Haley is a little bit weak in, and she wouldn't really necessarily feel comfortable saying all that very strongly. So it sounds quite light and polite, but there are quite a few things that you might want to ask more questions about. So here it talks about her contributing to class, sharing her ideas. Sometimes that is a polite way of saying she talks too much and she cannot focus on her work. So just see if you can ask, could you be focusing more on her work? Is she distracted from her learning? When she says she generally approaches her work with enthusiasm, the word generally is softening something, and it's unclear how much the teacher means. Is Haley always lazy? Is she just sometimes a bit distracted? See if you can ask more questions about that. Sometimes fails to apply this to her homework. She's not working hard enough on her homework. And again, is she skipping it? Is she doing it badly? And the last sentence is about a different topic, getting better at spelling and writing, but her presentation could be neater. As a polite way of saying, I would like it to be neater. I think it should be neater, which is definitely something I had in my reports when I was growing up, I think, because it was not neat. She's getting better, which says that she is not currently very good at it, and she could be neater. See if you can get some extra support for Haley. We've just got a couple more slides just looking at common concerns that parents have when they're moving from Hong Kong to the UK, because of the different education styles. So a really common question we get asked a lot is, without tests, I don't know the progress of my child. Very uncommon to have regular tests here in the UK, particularly at primary school. You will find much lighter homework, much lighter testing. The reason is we're focusing a lot on broader skills, long-term skills, lots of thinking skills, lots of connecting idea skills that you can't really test. So it's more something you can ask a teacher about and just say, I'm used to having lots of frequent tests. I'm not quite sure how they're doing. Can we talk about any areas of weakness? I would like to get more information. My child says there's no homework, but I don't know if it's true. It could be true, very, very well could be true. Schools in the UK set much less homework, which I know from speaking to parents is a really positive thing that they are often excited about and students are excited about. Check directly with the school. Joyce gave plenty of ideas of how to communicate with them. We've also got school diaries, usually homework diaries. You can talk to the parents, so usually we have class WhatsApp. The school doesn't seem concerned about low grades. A big focus on individualism and everyone being at their own level means that often there's not a push for everyone to be at the top. We are finding different people's different strengths. But you can ask direct questions about what their predicted grades are, what their progress is. You could consider tuition, you could consider external exams, think about things like, 11 plus, entrance exams, there are Cambridge exams, Trinity exams. You can get assessments at places like Seven Springs, other tutorial centres. It will help you to figure out, are they up to the right level for the new school? And then the teacher communicates a lot, but I can't tell how my child is doing still. We've talked a bit about some phrases that might be helpful. And we've got some tools on this last slide here. For getting information, repeat things. So if you heard a teacher say something, teachers are very used to saying the same thing a number of times in slightly different ways to make it clear to students. It can be difficult to listen to though if you're a second language speaker. So just repeat what you think you've heard to clarify it. For example, do you mean that Alex is getting low marks in his maths because of his weak vocabulary? And the teacher might say, oh no, I meant his vocabulary is strong, but he's still getting low marks in maths. You can ask for examples. Are there times when Tony doesn't seem to understand you? Or specifics. Emily's essay marks are very low. Is it her ideas or her writing? Ask for solutions. Does Jen still need a tutor? Is there a workbook you can do at home? And then clarify your expectations. Like I said, you'll often find things such as meeting the level of their peers, meets expectation. Is that the expected progress level? That's not a number, and it might not align with what you are wanting. So you can ask things directly. Is Eunice currently on track to get a place at this school? Is she on track to get a 9 in her GCSEs? And then you can get a very clear answer and find out where she's at level-wise, and make sure you're understanding what her progress really means and what her teacher really means.